Peace, family. It's your brother, Marc Lamont Hill. Welcome to Night School. Every night here on the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel, I host Night School, where we talk about the most interesting conversations, the most urgent debates, the most pressing conversations going on in the world today. We don't do the superficial cable news analysis. We don't do the drive-by talking points. We have real deep dives into important issues with some of the most interesting and brilliant minds in the world. And today is no different. I am joined by one of the most popular journalists in the world, one of the most important journalists in the world, and I would say one of the most gifted journalists in the world. He is my peer. He is my friend. He is the great Mehdi Hasan. Good to see you.
You're too kind, sir. Good to see you, Mark. How's life?
Life is crazy. So many things are going on in the world, and you're actually one of the few people who makes me feel more sane rather than less sane.
I need to talk to myself because I don't feel very sane at the moment.
And you have even more than most people going on, because in addition to trying to make sense of all of this, you're also building this important media company, which we see right behind you there, Zeteo. I, of course, signed up on day one.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate you.
Of course, of course. But tell people what Zeteo is, though.
So Zeteo is a media company I launched after I left MSNBC, and some of your viewers may know that shortly after October 7th, MSNBC canceled my shows on Peacock and MSNBC, and I decided not to stay there. They gave me the option of staying on as a guest host, and I was like, it's 2024 is coming up. I need a platform to say my piece. So I quit MSNBC and I decided to set my own thing up rather than go work somewhere else. I thought, if not now, when? If not me, who? I'm 45 years old. We're in an election year. There's a genocide going on, a fascist at the door. I got a lot of stuff I want to say, and there's a lot of other people who want to join me. So I set up Zeteo earlier this year. We had the formal launch in April. We have 250,000 subscribers globally. You can go to zeteo.com, Zeteo.com. That's the website. It's an email newsletter. We have people like Bassem Youssef and Naomi Klein and Owen Jones and Fatima Bhutto, John Harwood. We have great people from across the left and liberal left contributing to us. It's an all singing, all dancing media company. We do streaming shows, podcasts, columns right here from my home studio and from our studio in DC. And we're having a lot of fun, right? Because we're free to do whatever the hell we want and say what needs to be said.
You talk about your journey, your process leaving MSNBC. You just said you quit and that you had the option of staying on as a guest host, and I'm sure as a contributor.
Yes.
But that's a big difference than having your own show on Peacock Monday to Friday, as well as, you know, I think you had the
Sunday show on the cable.
Sunday show simulcast on MSNBC. I get that you left and they offered you the option to stay, but there are many of us who observed from the outside and felt like you were being pushed out, that they put you in an impossible position. What do you say to that?
I say that no one's happy to lose their shows, and I don't think NBC would pretend it's a good thing when you tell a host you're no longer going to have shows on. I made my decision very quickly. I knew I had a day to kind of feel sorry for myself, and then it was very quick to, well, what am I doing next? Because it's not in my nature. A lot of people said to me, friends and family said, hey, take the paycheck, stay, chill, write a book, chill out with the kids, do a show once every couple of weeks, sit in for Chris Hayes when he's on vacation. But I know that's not me. And anyone who knows me knows that I need to be running my mouth. I need to be saying my piece. I need to be reacting day to day. And therefore, the only option was to leave. You know, I could have stayed for much longer. And it's just not me. Other people may have said, you know, each to their own. Other people may have said, you know what? The platform is so big. The audience is so mainstream that they want to stay and do it. And there's pros and cons. But for me, as I say, doing this was a calling. I realized very quickly this is what I wanted to do. And, you know, a friend of mine said to me recently, he said, I see more of you now than I ever saw of you over the last 3 years. You're
absolutely.
Everywhere. And it's a, you know, and my wife and kids might say the opposite and get mad at me for that. But I am doing a lot. You know, I'm doing CNN next week. I still go on MSNBC on my friend Joy's shows and Eamon's shows and Ali's shows. I'm doing MSNBC on Sunday, I think. So I'm still out there on cable, but I have my own platform saying my own thing. I'm still doing Piers Morgan. I write a column for The Guardian. I'm now back to doing a show alongside you at Al Jazeera English. I do head to head at Al Jazeera. You still do Upfront. So, you know, in that sense, I have the platforms I wanted to. My thing has always been, where can I reach the audience that I want to reach? It's never been about money. It's never been about prestige. It's never been about which employer, what brand you have next to your name. It is about, can I reach the audience I want to reach in the way I want to reach them? And that's always informed all the decisions I make, from moving to the UK to the US, from moving to The Intercept, from joining NBC, which I have no regrets about. I had a great 3.5 years at NBC, built up a great show and a great audience. But right now, in this moment, I am where I'm supposed to be.
Just one more question on that, because I watched you lose your show. I watched this moment after October 7th where there were no Muslims on TV for a moment, at least on their channel. I saw Ayman not be there. I saw
Ayman, Ali, and I, our shows were off air.
Do you think that was intentional?
They say it wasn't. You'd have to ask MSNBC.
I'm going to do a Mehdi here. Yeah, but my question was, what do you think? Do you think it was intentional?
And I'm going to be the politician. It doesn't matter what I think. You'd have to ask them.
Fair enough. All right. One of the things that you've been most excited about, obviously, as we all are, is talking about 2024.
Yeah.
How are you making sense of this election season at this time?
It's deeply depressing and demoralizing and frustrating. I am walking this weird tightrope. Some others are. A lot of people have chosen not to, but I've stayed on a tightrope where I am basically saying that Trump is an existential threat to American democracy, to our climate, to our planet, and to Muslims and Palestinians and Arabs in the Middle East and at home. But that the Democrats have failed miserably on this issue. They are complicit in genocide. Kamala Harris had a chance to break with Joe Biden. She had a chance in July. She had a chance in August. She had a chance in September. She's had a chance in October, and she's failed to break with Joe Biden. Not only has she failed to break with Joe Biden, she's doubled down in support for Israel. Her team have gone out of their way to say she's not breaking with U.S. policy. There is no change. And that is insane when, for example, you have a state like Michigan where a bunch of people who were Democrats who voted overwhelmingly for Biden in 2020 have made it very clear that they cannot vote for Democrats complicit in genocide. They cannot vote for people who have helped kill their cousins and uncles and aunts and siblings and family back home in Gaza, in Lebanon, maybe in the coming days and weeks, Iran. So it is a really frustrating situation where both sides are basically pushing genocide. One side is the incumbent and taking most of the flack, understandably so. The other side isn't getting the attention it should. We've kind of given Trump and the Republican Party a pass.
For sure.
I see a lot of activists who will only talk about Harris-Biden. And if you say, what about Trump? Well, that's all hypothetical. It's not hypothetical, actually. The weapons that go to Israel go with congressional votes, all of them Republican. The only people who are voting for conditions on aid to Israel are Democrats, right? 45 to 55 Democrats in the House, a far too small a number in my view, but they're all Democrats. And whenever I talk to Muslim or Arab crowds, and I've been speaking to Muslim crowds, Mark, in Philly, in Georgia, in swing states and in non-swing states. I've been all over the country, California, Illinois, New York, here in the DC metro area. The one thing I always ask the crowd is, there are 75 to 85, I can't remember last time I checked the number, somewhere close to 100 members of Congress who support a ceasefire. Around 40 to 50 who support conditioning aid to Israel. How many of them are Republicans? The answer is 0. I think that's an important fact to keep in mind when we're trying to work out the best way forward and who we're voting for. But look, I get people who say plague on both your houses. I'm voting Jill Stein. I'm staying at home. This two-party system is corrupt and complicit in genocide. Totally get that. It's undeniable. My slight difference, where I differ from some of my critics online, is that I've always believed that I want to change the world for the better, but in the meantime, I have to live in the world as it is. I cannot pretend. I cannot pretend that we don't have a two-party system. I cannot pretend that on January 20th, 2025, the president won't be either Kamala Harris or Donald J. Trump. I have to live in that world.
I think the third-party argument's more complicated. Now, I want to get to third party because I want to talk about, and I especially want to talk about that interview you did with Jill Stein and Butch Ware, which I watched twice, which probably says more about me being a nerd than anything else. But as of now, when you look at the way that Kamala Harris has moved through this election season, and Donald Trump, to be sure, what do you think the outcome is as of now? Who do you think wins?
Well, I stopped doing predictions in 2016, Mark, when I got Brexit wrong and I got Trump wrong, and I was like, let's not do predictions anymore. It's insane. There's no value in it. What I would say is, am I feeling good about the prospects of the Democratic win right now? No, the momentum's gone. I went to the DNC in August. There was a lot of energy. It looked like a victory party. In fact, one congressman said to me, like, we haven't won yet. Why are people so over the top? Joy. Remember joy? This is the campaign of joy, we were told. That energy, a lot of that energy has gone in some swing states. Not totally. There's still a lot of Democrats on the ground doing hard organizing and door knocking. The early voting is favoring the Democrats, as it always does.
Yeah.
But look at the polling. We're speaking on Friday. The New York Times just put out its final Siena College pre-election poll. It's a dead heat. Not only is that insane, that everyone in the world thinks America is insane, that Donald Trump is in a dead heat. Donald Trump should be 20, 30 points behind in any objective, normal universe. The fact that he's dead heat is in itself an indictment of the American political and media systems being broken and the inability of Democrats to get their message across. But separate to the dead heat, the trend is bad, Mark, right? Because she had a lead in that poll a month ago, and it's gone. So a lot of her leads have gone. Trump seems to have...
Why, though? Why? I mean...
Great question. I think there's a multiplicity of factors. I think you've got the Gaza issue as an issue as much as establishment media and the Democrats want to pretend it's a fringe left Muslim issue. It's actually much broader than just Muslims or progressives. A lot of people are upset about what's going on. But it's not the only issue. I think the inability of Harris in multiple interviews to say how she'll be different to Joe Biden. I had Congressman Ro Khanna on my show on Zateo, and he said it's not just about Gaza. She needs to go on air and say 3 things that she's different to Biden on, 3 major substantive issues. She hasn't done that.
But Biden beat Trump. If Biden could beat Trump, right? Take Gaza off the table for a minute. If America said, look, we'd rather have Trump than Hillary, then they watched the Trump presidency and said, hey, this isn't for us. We want Biden. And then she walks out and looks just like Biden. That's, to me, that should make this more competitive because the argument...
No, because you're forgetting the main part, which affects everything about American politics, which is Americans are amnesiacs. Americans are goldfish. They cannot remember anything that happened yesterday, let alone last week, let alone last year, let alone 4 years ago. So yes, in 2020, we were in the middle of a COVID pandemic. We had tens of millions of people unemployed. The economy was in the ditch. Donald Trump was telling people to put disinfectant in their arms. And people said, we're done with this. This has been 4 years of trauma. Right, and Biden beat him by 7 million votes. It shouldn't have been close, but it was because we have a dumb electoral college. But it was a resounding landslide defeat for Trump in the popular vote. The problem is he then does an insurrection. He then gets impeached. Everyone is anti-Trump in January, February 2021. Kevin McCarthy is anti-Trump in January 2021. And then the Republicans begin to rewrite history. The liberal media goes AWOL. The Democrats, as usual, go into a defensive posture, not aggressive. Exactly what Obama did in 2008-9. He comes in and he says, forget about Guantanamo and Bagram and CIA torture. We're not looking back. We're looking forward. Biden does the same ridiculous thing. He puts Merrick Garland, the worst attorney general, into the place. Merrick Garland, we're not sure if he's alive or dead, doesn't prosecute Trump. Spends the great irony is Republicans, Mark, keep saying they prosecuted Trump. It was weaponized justice. I'm like, I wish it was weaponized justice. It was the exact opposite. The Democratic base had to drag Garland kicking and screaming to even get a special counsel. Donald Trump is going into an election in 11 days, having not seen the inside of a single courtroom in relation to January 6th. That is one of the greatest indictments of our broken judiciary and a ridiculously weak Democratic Party that I've ever seen. No one would have believed me in 2021 if I said, come 2024, Trump will be the candidate and he'll not face trial for a single thing. That's insane, right? So that is where we are right now. People have forgotten how bad Trump was. He's gotten away with his crimes. Harris will not break with Biden, not just on Gaza, but other issues, right? Tim Walz goes out and says, let's get rid of the Electoral College. Tim Walz is a great candidate. I pushed for him to be the VP candidate.
Me too.
He's the kind of energy they need. They subdued Walz. They picked him. And then they pulled the life out of him. And this week he came back and said Elon Musk's a dipshit. I'm like, yes, that's the Walz we're missing.
Yeah, you know, right?
But when Tim Walz goes, let's get rid of the Electoral College, which all Americans support, majority of Americans support doing that. The Harris campaign slaps him down. I mean, this is the kind of insanity that we're seeing. You know, Mark, you know this. You've covered American politics much longer than I have. Never underestimate the Democratic Party's consultant class's ability to shoot themselves in the foot, right? She is getting bad advice. There's no debate about that. And look, their view is we will get through thanks to white suburban women, college-educated white women in Michigan suburbs. We will have Liz Cheney give us the Nikki Haley voters. Abortion will get us across the line. And I'm not saying they're wrong. They may pull it off. Abortion may save the U.S. constitutional system, but it shouldn't be this close. And as Michael Moore, another guest on my show recently said, you can win without Michigan, but why take that risk?
How much of this has to do with factors that aren't policy-driven at all? I mean, there's a concern, a question that I have, you know, which is how much of this is driven by race, how much of this is driven by gender concerns. I hear the she's not likable narrative all the time. And I mean, I know Kamala Harris, and I actually do think that she's likable. I actually do think, that's not good. I know Kamala Harris, and I think she's plenty likable, and I think she's fine. There's a million reasons not to vote for Kamala Harris. Her personality isn't one of them. But I also don't base my presidents on how much I like them or how much I want to have a beer with them. Americans do. Americans, we absolutely do. And nobody.
Bush was the guy you could have a barbecue with. Al Gore wasn't. Remember that?
Exactly. But now it's like we didn't want to have a barbecue with Hillary Clinton. We didn't want to have. We didn't want to have a beer with Hillary Clinton. We didn't want to have a beer with Kamala Harris. Noticing some patterns here of who we want to have a beer with and who we find likable.
Yeah.
In your estimation, how much of our visions of our candidates are skewed by or colored by these other factors?
Massively. This is the thing the Democrats get wrong, and the left in particular gets wrong. I see myself as someone on the left, but I've always been critical of the Bernie Sanders view, and I'm a big admirer of Bernie Sanders. But one thing I think the Sanders wing gets wrong is you give everyone health care, you raise minimum wage, you do populist economics, and you win. That's not enough, right? America is divided culturally, not just in class terms, but in racial terms. And for example, one of the things, Mark, is if lefties come along and say, we're going to give you this, we're going to give you that, for a lot of white working class people, that is coded as you're giving gifts to minorities. You're not giving it to us, you're giving it to the black folks. And I think that is a huge problem, right? Racial resentment is one of the key drivers of Trump's support. That used to be a debate in 2016. 9 years later, it's not a debate, right? Every academic study pretty much tells us that racial resentment, cultural resentment, a desire to go back to some imaginary golden age where white people were at the top of the tree clearly is what's driving a lot of the support for Trump. Like, that's been shown by academic after academic, study after study. You can see it with your own eyes at MAGA rallies, right? We know what's going on there. So I do think it's definitely, and it was a bold move for the Democratic Party to put a black woman in there when, the argument is these people are going to get even more worked up. Interestingly, though, Mark, I see some of the polling on CNN. I don't know how much to believe on polling front, is that Harris is actually, according to some recent polls, doing better with white men than Joe Biden was doing. Now, I don't know how true that is, but that's an interesting little twist that we saw on CNN.
Wow. I'm not familiar with that network you mentioned, but the polls sound quite
CNN,
interesting.
it's a small little TV network. I don't think you've ever been on it.
Yeah, nothing. Doesn't sound like anything I'd be interested in. But the poll is interesting. I'm actually seeing I'm seeing some anecdotal stuff and a few polls talk about black men being a base that's surprisingly weak for her. That white men, as you just pointed out, are actually a stronger base for her.
I think that's exaggerated, Mark. I just think, look, there's these polls that show that Trump is picking up more support amongst black men and Latino men than previous Republican candidates have, like a Mitt Romney or a John McCain, or even he did in 2016 and 2020. But, to be fair, and, Asted Herndon of New York Times and Van Jones at CNN have made the point that we're starting to get into a slightly kind of, I worry that we're getting into kind of, well, this is to blame then. And it's like, at the end of the day,
that's what they're looking
no matter
for.
how many black men go for Trump, no matter how many Latino men go for Trump, no matter how many Muslims go for Trump, overwhelmingly minority communities will still vote for Kamala Harris at higher rates than white people. Ultimately, Trump will win because of white people. And one statistic that everyone forgets, but it's at the core of American politics. The last time a Democratic presidential candidate won a majority of the white vote was Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1964. He then signs the Voting Rights Act in 65. A Democrat has never won the white vote since then. Bill Clinton didn't win the white vote. Jimmy Carter came very close, but didn't win the white vote. Joe Biden, Scranton, Delaware, working class Joe Biden did not win a majority of the white vote. So it's a kind of, to come along and say, well, Kamala Harris, of course she's not going to win a majority of the white vote. But the issue is the margins, right? How do you bring down the margins amongst college and non-college educated voters? But ultimately, if you're going to blame a group of people, a demographic in this country for Trump and fascism, you've got to blame white people, in particular, white men, in particular, non-college educated white men who are part of the base and who are driven by this resentment of the world has changed. And rather than blame billionaire oligarchs, I'm going to blame the immigrant. I'm going to blame the Mexican. I'm going to blame the Muslim. I'm going to blame the transgender kid. I'm going to blame whoever I can, except the people who are really screwing me over. And I think we need to be honest about that. I think we need to be honest about the double standards. Donald Trump just did a rally where he spent several minutes talking about Arnold Palmer's penis.
That was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen in my life.
But all I have to say is, if Kamala Harris did a rally where she spoke for 10 minutes about a female tennis player's vagina in the locker room, what would have happened? Jon Stewart made this point on The Daily Show. What would have happened? It would have been 24/7 coverage. We would still be talking about it now, 6 days later. We all moved on from Trump. Trump gets away with stuff because he's the white dude. And by the way, one last point on kind of this country and how we see politics. We now know that one of the creators of The Apprentice came out recently and said, look, I'm really sorry. I played a role in giving the world Trump. We know that Donald Trump wouldn't have been president in 2016 were it not for The Apprentice. We know that The Apprentice created this weird aura and myth around a failed billionaire, fake billionaire, not even a billionaire, never did anything successful in business life, inherited money from daddy and burned a lot of it, went bankrupt 5 times. Right? This is the guy that The Apprentice created this aura around. And people were like, wow, I want the guy from The Apprentice. Americans love showbiz. They love entertainment. They love the idea of kind of the rich, successful person in the American dream. Trump is none of that, but NBC and The Apprentice gave us that in 2016. And he's wrote that for a long time. Even today, people say to me, well, I interviewed a Trump supporter recently on Head to Head on Al Jazeera, and he said, well, he's not a politician. He's not, because he's a politician. He's president of the United States. But he still gets to kind of surf this, I'm anti-politics. I'm anti-establishment. Elon Musk is saying shit like, give it to the man, vote for Trump. Are you crazy? You want us to vote for two billionaires, Musk and Trump, and that's anti the system? Come on.
Yeah, that's classic fascist logics. I wonder about the media's role in this. I worked at that cable news network that you mentioned before. Now that
you
I think
did, I had no idea.
It just hit me. I've been thinking about Arnold Palmer so much I forgot about this other thing. And I remember in 2016 when we were covering the election, I was at HuffPost as well. And I noticed two things happening simultaneously there. At HuffPost, and you and I were at HuffPost at the same time.
Yeah, I was there too.
I remember they just didn't take it seriously. And at some point, the head of politics said, we're no longer going to cover.
Yes. Our good friend Ryan Grimm.
Yep. We're not going to cover Trump on politics. We're going to cover him on the entertainment page because he's not serious. And I remember saying, for the record, I mean, Ariana Huffington was furious at me. She's been furious at me like twice. That was one of them. You know, for me saying this. And I said, it's irresponsible. It's disrespectful to voters to put him on the entertainment page. He's a front runner for the Republican nomination at the time. But also, he could win. Yes. And they all said, there's no way he could win.
Don't forget, it was the black folks saying he could win. Remember?
Yes.
It wasn't just you, my friend. It was Keith Ellison who went on ABC with George Stephanopoulos, and this is in 2015, and says Trump could win. And everyone laughed. They laugh. I think it was they laugh out loud at the idea that Trump could win. And look, I put myself in that camp. It's not that I dismissed the racist, fascist tendencies in the American electorate. I actually thought I didn't really factor in the way the Electoral College would go in his favor. And to this day, I'm still outraged that Hillary won by 3 million, Joe Biden won by 7 million, but the elections look so close because America decides to make it about 40,000 people in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. That's not democracy in my understanding of the word.
Yeah, no, I agree. How much of it is we don't think he can win, and how much of it is we don't care? I remember, and I said that because at CNN all summer we gave Trump so much free.
Oh yeah, and to be fair, Zucker admitted that later, right? That we shouldn't have just run empty podiums. Trump's come about to speak, all of that stuff. And look, 2016 was a media disaster. 2020 there was a slight improvement where journalists were like, all right, we're going to call out some lies. People like me and Jonathan Swan and Daniel Dale, all of us, by the way, immigrants. Came along and kind of did some fact-checking and tough interviews, the Canadian, the Australian, the Brit. And suddenly you saw American interviewers start to do a little bit tougher interviews and call out Trump stuff and the pandemic, obviously. But now I feel like in 24, we've gone back in time. I feel like the media is now basically waiting for Trump to use Tim Snyder's phrase about, the rise of fascism. They are obeying in advance, right? They're keeping their heads down. They're telling journalists to be careful what they say. You've seen the scandal at the LA Times this week, which has refused to endorse Donald Trump. Refused to endorse a presidential candidate. It was going to endorse, obviously, Harris. It's the LA Times, but the owner of the Times is a billionaire friend of Elon Musk's, and they're not endorsing a candidate. You're seeing at the Washington Post, where Will Lewis, the British dude brought in by Jeff Bezos, who Trump claims to hate, but Bezos wants his government contracts to stay in place. They may not endorse. So this is classic media obeying in advance. They're looking and saying, well, Trump might be coming back. How do we stay in his good books? We saw that at NBC, my old company, when they tried to hire Ronna McDaniel, and the staff at MSNBC, led by Rachel Maddow and others, revolted and they rescinded the offer. But they were getting Ronna McDaniel in for the same reason, to show Trump, look, we're not so bad. You can talk to us. Right. And I think that is a problem. To go back to your point, how many of the media organizations actually care if he wins or loses? Remember the famous line from Les Moonves, CEO of CBS News in 2016, Trump may be bad for America, but he's good for CBS.
Ooh, that is quite scary. One of the things you said earlier before we go is, this idea of blame and who gets blamed.
Yeah.
If Kamala Harris loses, or if Trump loses, whatever, right?
Yes.
Do we blame the black person? Do we blame the Muslim?
Trump says he's going to blame the Jews, but that didn't make more than half a day headline.
Again, mind-boggling. I covered it here.
Imagine if Harris said that. Imagine if Harris said that, or Biden said that.
It's mind-boggling to me. But I feel like there are people out here who say that if Kamala loses, just like they said when Hillary lost, that it's the third party candidate, that it's Butch Ware and Jill Stein's fault, that it's Cornel West's fault, that it's Claudia De La Cruz's fault. My issue, and I'm a Green Party member for 2.5 decades now. I voted for Jill Stein in Pennsylvania. You're going to murder me. I don't regret that. In 2016, I voted for Jill Stein.
You have no regrets.
No, I don't. I don't. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. But I want to hear you more on this. But I absolutely voted for Jill Stein. I thought it was the right choice. I thought it was the principal choice. I campaigned for Jill Stein. I went around the country for Jill Stein. And I felt like instead of saying Hillary Clinton should have run a better campaign, Hillary Clinton should have addressed Black voters, Hillary Clinton should have spent a little less time in Florida, which she was obsessed with toward the end, and not these other places. Instead of saying Hillary Clinton wasn't a good candidate or the Democrats stole from Bernie, none of that stuff comes up. It's just those 50,000 people that voted Green that might have otherwise stayed home, that might have otherwise voted Trump, that might have otherwise done these other things. You're the fault of American democracy. There's not a day that goes by that me, Eddie Glaude, I don't know Susan Sarandon, but I would imagine her too. She's back with me all the time. Every time something bad happens, they say, "Are you happy now, Mark? You're responsible for abortion. You're responsible for no affirmative action." It's mind-boggling how we think about this. So I think it's unfair.
So here's my response. To go back to how I started the show, I walk a tightrope on this stuff. It makes me unpopular with some folks.
Yes.
But I try and walk and chew gum at the same time. I believe that Hillary Clinton was a bad candidate in 2016. She ran a bad campaign. She didn't visit Wisconsin. She said some awful stuff. And she wasn't the greatest candidate to take on Donald Trump in what was supposed to be a change year. No one wanted a Clinton. Having said all that, by the way, she won the popular vote, to be fair to her. In any other country, we would be finishing a second Clinton term, right? In any other country in the world.
Yeah.
If not for the electoral vote, we shouldn't forget that fact, right? She won whatever it was, millions more votes. But for the system we had, she ran a bad campaign. Knowing the Electoral College, she should have more attention in these swing states. And I agree with that. Having said that, I also understand why liberals get mad and say, when it was such a consequential race and such a clear choice, how could you have the Greens saying they're all the same? And I interviewed Jill Stein in 2016, before I interviewed her and Butch recently. I interviewed her in 2016 for our show, Upfront. I'm going to call it our show, Upfront in 2016. And I said to her at the time, and I went back and I watched the clip recently, I said, if there is a swing voter in Pennsylvania who says, Jill Stein, you can't win the presidency. I support the green goals, but in this state, who should I pick, Clinton or Trump? Would you say go to Clinton? She said, no. They're both the same. They're both as bad. There's no lesser evils. That for me is a problem. That's what I'm going to call out. I'm not going to blame green voters or say Greens cost the election, but I do think it's disingenuous for third-party candidates to say, well, they're all the same when they're not. And actually, let's take Cornell as an example. Cornell is running this time, and I'm good friends with Cornell. I disagree with his position this time around. But Cornell also in 2020 did not run as a third-party candidate. And he said, I'm not going to run as a third-party candidate, and I'm not going to support the Greens because we need an anti-fascist alliance, right? We need an anti-fascist alliance. He said, neoliberalism is bad, fascism is worse, right? I liked that, Cornell. That is my own view. Right.
But so I think you would say, but I saw Joe Biden these last 4 years. It turns out they're pretty fascist too.
Hold on. Pre-October 7th, Joe Biden ran the most center-left presidency since LBJ on a domestic level. That's just a fact.
It's not a logical inconsistency from Cornell. He's saying
true. It is a logical inconsistency. Cornell's not here to defend himself, but I've asked him this on my show. Yeah. If you think Trump was bad in 20, he's much worse in 24. So I don't get, like, Donald Trump of 2024 is more fascistic, more violent, more racist, more threatening, more unhinged, more unstable than Donald Trump in 2020 and 2016. That's just an objective reality. But to go back to my point about like the blame, I don't believe in the blame game. I did a long video for Zateo. People can watch it. I think 1 million people watched it on Instagram, where I said direct to camera to Vice President Harris, if you lose, don't you dare blame Muslims in Michigan.
Yes, I love
Look in the mirror. Look in the mirror. It's on you. You've had every chance to do the bare minimum. Nobody's asking you to abandon support for Israel. Nobody's asking you to support ICC warrants against Netanyahu. We're just saying put some conditions on aid, make a ceasefire happen with the leverage you have. Put a Palestinian on stage at the DNC, right? These are kind of minimum basic. If you can't even do that, then it's on you when you lose the Muslim vote in Michigan, right? So I'm very clear about where the blame lies. Politicians have the blame. Nobody's owed a vote, right? They don't own any votes. I'm with you on that. Having said that, again, walk and chew gum. Sorry to be the guy. Voters also have to take responsibility. Too many people tell me, Mark, well, you know what? Doesn't matter to me. I'm voting green. Whoever wins, nothing to do with me. Well, actually it is, right? Because you still live in the United States of America. You're still going to want to organize and be active over the next 4 years. You still care about Palestinians even after November 2024. So actually you do need to give a shit about what's coming down the line. And this idea, I think a lot of people, and this is where the debate comes down to, I don't see voting as a declaration of faith. It is not my shahada, right? It is something pragmatic and practical that I do. The line that Olayemi Olusegun and others have used very eloquently, which is you're basically choosing your weakest opponent. We don't like either of them, but I want the weaker person in office, the person I can influence, pressure, lobby, move.
Let me ask you. Let me
AOC and Cori Bush. I think Cori Bush said it up front with you just the other day. From a moral perspective, nobody wants to vote for the genociders. From a strategic perspective, where are you going to have more luck in the future pushing people?
But do you have no moral non-starters? I mean, because I get that argument, right? Which is, look, they're all genociders, they're all imperialists, they're all neoliberals, they're all corporate candidates, whatever.
Hold on. I do have morals, but I do have moral lines, but I hate the way, and sorry, I'm going to be very unpopular here. I do not like the way that people have just suddenly woken up in 2024 and said, now it's all about morality. What about all the previous elections? Muslims voted for Bill Clinton happily in 2000 and in 92 and 96. In 96, Bill Clinton was presiding over the deaths of hundreds of thousands of children in Iraq. UN officials were calling that genocide. Madeleine Albright was like, whatever, right? It's worth it.
Yeah, but you can't say, well, you made the wrong choice before, so you have to.
That's not a wrong choice. It's about every American president, to quote Noam Chomsky, is a war criminal who should be at Nuremberg. If that's don't vote at all. Don't vote at all then.
So for example, if Kamala Harris right now were to have the right position on Palestine, if she were to have the right position on Lebanon, if she were to say, not only do I want to condition aid, I'm going to suspend aid. You know, I'm going to say that we need to end ethno states everywhere. If she did all those right things, if she had a more progressive tax vision, if she had a different position on fracking, if she were basically your check the box, I love all these things, but she believed fundamentally that being Muslim is wrong, or she fundamentally believed that women were inferior, or she fundamentally believed.
What's your question? What's your question, Mark?
Could you not say, hey, that's a moral non-starter for me, so I can't vote?
So my problem there is, Mark, it's not a referendum, right? It's not Brexit. If you're telling me I'm going on November 5th to say whether I like Harris or don't like Harris, I'm voting don't like. If you're saying I'm going to the referendum to say, should we support Kamala Harris or not support Kamala Harris, I'm going to say not support because she's not done on Gaza. That is not what we're voting on. We're voting on a binary choice. The other guy is Trump. You cannot wish Trump away. What bothers me is the disingenuousness of some activists who just talk about Harris as if this is a referendum on Kamala Harris. It is not. It is a choice. And if George Bush Sr. was on the other side, I'd say, let's do it. Let's punish the Dems. Put Bush Sr. in for 4 years. We can tolerate Bush Sr. for 4 years. He might even be better on the Middle East, George Bush Sr. But that is not the choice. The other choice is an unhinged, racist, white supremacist, narcissistic, mentally unbalanced, anti-Muslim, anti-Jewish guy who should be nowhere near a school board, let alone nuclear weapons, who's going to escalate the genocide in Gaza, who's probably going to start a war with Iran, who knows what he's going to do in other parts of the world, and who at home, by the way, at home, is going to undermine the democracy that allows us to speak out for Muslims and Palestinians and Arabs. These guys have a project to shut down all pro-Palestinian journalism activists. What we're doing right now is going to be under threat in 2025. I know a lot of people don't want to hear this. Oh, Mehdi, this is hyperbole. You're exaggerating. You're fear-mongering. No. This is what they are advertising to us. When I said in 2019, Trump loses, he won't leave. He'll cause a riot. People said, you're exaggerating. That's exactly what he did. Take these people seriously and literally. Don't take them as jokers. To go back to the point about the entertainment section of HuffPost, when these white supremacists and these fascists and Stephen Miller and General Michael Flynn and Steve Bannon, when they say what they're going to do, they are going to do it.
So, okay, fair enough. So we have to run, but it sounds like what I'm hearing you say is it's not, you're not against this in general as an idea. It's the unique and particular
it's this particular choice. I'm telling you, if George Bush Sr. was the Republican candidate, I would probably be saying, yes, let's do it. Get rid of the Dems, teach them a lesson, put the Republicans in for 4 years. That is not the choice. The choice is Trump and Harris. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you the choice. I wish it wasn't this choice. But
as a third-party candidate, though, I can tell you every 4 years they say, if it weren't Bush, I think that's, sorry, Mark, I don't agree with that. Every 4 years I'm told that. Every 4 years I'm told the sky is falling with George W. Bush. The sky is falling with George H.W. Bush.
I'm going to disagree with anybody else. I'm going to give you an example. Let's go back to 2008. Barack Obama ran against John McCain. Right? Yes. John McCain famously went out of his way. I don't think he did enough, but to say, oh, this man's not an Arab. He's a good person. Remember that? John McCain stopped the voter. Yes. Right? It was like the bare minimum. I still think it was a little racist, but people love John McCain for doing that. Barack Obama did not call John McCain a fascist. John McCain did not call Barack Obama a communist who he's going to lock up and imprison. Right? Today, Barack Obama talks about my friend John McCain. So let's, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff did not say John McCain was a fascist to his core. John McCain's chief of staff did not come out and say he loves Hitler. I mean, let's just be real here. Donald Trump,
but I'm saying it's third-party
Donald Trump
candidates.
is very different to any previous Republican candidate who has come along in our lifetimes. Let's not normalize.
Trump is an outlier for sure. I think it would be dishonest to say otherwise. My point is that in 2008, I did not vote for Barack Obama. I voted for McKinney and
the world, by the way, the world would not have fallen in if McCain had won.
But we were told it would. But we were told it would. Is my point. We were told.
I'm not sure that's true. I mean, of course, party operatives are always going to say that. But this is not party operatives, right? People keep telling. I said yesterday to a friend of mine. Well, the people are saying he's a fascist. Oh, this is Democratic Party shill propaganda. Robert Paxton, America's preeminent scholar of fascism, is not a Democratic Party shill. He's a historian of fascism who spent 10 years saying Trump's not a fascist. Now he says Trump's a fascist. Sorry, it's fascism, right? This is not propaganda. This is not fear-mongering. This is objective reality. And let me just say one last thing on the Green Party, because people confuse my position. If you don't live in a swing state, I have no issue with voting Green. I might vote Green. Why not? You got nothing to lose. The dumb system means if I live in New York or California,
your vote doesn't count anyway.
If your vote doesn't count anyway, that's a whole separate discussion about the inanity of American democracy as it is. If you live in Alabama, Mississippi, if you live in Massachusetts, New York, California, vote however you like. Don't vote. Who cares? It doesn't matter. If you live in a swing state and you can determine the fate of the country and the world, think long and hard about the choice. If you still want to vote Green, go for it. But at least think through the consequences. Don't tell me that by voting Green, I have clean hands or I have no responsibility for what comes next. That's bullshit. We're all citizens of this country. We're all going to have to live with the consequences of the decision that happens, whether it ends up being Harris or Trump. That's all I'm asking. Let's have an honest debate.
Fair enough. I love talking to you, and I wish we could talk more, man. In the meantime, I'm going to go to Zateo and check out all the stuff that I haven't checked out there, as well as the Substack stuff that's associated with it. I get 5 of them, I think, a week, including Peter Beinart, which is my favorite one. Everybody go to Zateo. Don't just consume this stuff. If you can, subscribe to it.
Yes.
Independent media.
Support me, support Mark, support independent journalism.
That's it. That's when we're going to get the truth. All right, Mehdi, good to see you, brother.
Good to see you, Mark. Thanks so much.
All right, everybody. That was Night School for tonight. If you like what you saw, hit the like button. Even if you didn't like it, hit the like button anyway and show corporate media that they are not the only game in town. In addition, hit the subscribe button. It makes our social media footprint bigger, which allows the content to get out to more people. And if you're so inclined, please hit the join button and become a member of the channel. It gives us the financial stability that we need to build the channel up. And if you can't make a monthly commitment, I do ask that you maybe make a one-time commitment, what we call a monthly donation to Night School. Go to Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle and drop what you can. If you give $1, we're grateful. If you give $1 million, we're a little bit more grateful. But anything in the middle, we're equally grateful for. But we're asking everybody who's watching right now to donate $10. If everybody watching right now would put $10 on the Cash App, the PayPal, the Venmo, or the Zelle, we will meet our financial goals for the month. Thank you for watching Night School. We'll see you this Sunday for office hours. Peace.